let me take a minute here and just let you know that um, you all know Gary Malkin. He came on our call actually last Monday, which was wonderful, great surprise. And Gary has introduced me to some amazing people, one of whom is Jeff Patnaude. And um, his bio says it gives you a sense of the breadth of his experience, but I'm so happy you're here to experience Jeff in person because his character, is unique and stands out by with integrity, with authenticity, and I'm really excited for you to meet him tonight. Um, he will speak to us on our topic of faith. And of course, we hope we have time for questions and answers at the end. So with no further ado, I mean, I could say a million things about Jeff, but how much I love him and appreciate him is top. That's the number one thing. So let's just dive right in, Jeff, shall we? Welcome.
Thank you, Hope. So how would you like to dive?
Well, let's just begin with, in your life, how has faith guided you, lifted you, taken lemons and turned them into lemonade? You've done that multiple times. Like, just maybe give us a sense of when, maybe starting from when faith kicked in for you and just how it's run through your life.
Well, I think it's like grace. It's a gift that comes available to everyone. It's free. And I love the story, having grown up in New York and moved to the South. There's a great story of a man from the North who was having breakfast in the South, and grits arrived on his breakfast plate. And he called the waitress over and said, ma'am, what is this? And she said, well, sir, that's grits. And he said, well, I didn't order grits. And she said, you don't order grits, they just come. So I think that faith is kind of like grits. It's always available, at least here in the South. It's available to us, and faith is that connection that we can make, but it's a courageous one to take the step. And for me, it began when I was actually 5 years old. I had my first mystical kind of experience. I was playing out on the porch of our parents' home by myself, even though we had 6 children in our family. And suddenly I was surrounded by this envelope of light. And I remember distinctly looking at the side of the porch to register the fact that I was still there. And I wondered if I was dying. And just somehow the light or the envelope said, you are loved. And I went on playing. But it's so memorable that all the aspects of the experience were and remain very clear. I went on to live a very wonderful life of a local high school in a small town, quarterback of a championship football team, in the drama club, student council, the whole thing. And I thought, because I was into music at a very early age, I had my own dance band at the age of 12, I think. And when the Beatles came out, we shifted over to become a Beatle band. I started writing music, and we were quite good, actually. Our bass player, Gary Rayner, went on to play with Sammy Davis Jr., Count Basie, and then Prairie Home Companion until that went off the air. And so I thought I'd go into music, and I applied to Juilliard in New York and got the first acceptance letter for round 1, because you go through a rather extensive process. And in the midst of that, I had an experience at the age of 15 while reading one night before going to sleep of The Voice. I call it The Voice. And the voice always calls me Jeffrey. So it gets my attention when I hear it. And the voice said, Jeffrey, you're going into the ministry. Well, this was a brand new thought. Even though I had been involved in the local Episcopal church, my family was very devout. And I was an altar boy, but on Fridays and Saturday nights, I shot pool. I hustled about $100 a weekend because I was good on the pool table. I smoked 2 packs of Pall Malls a day, and I was kind of a little hood. But on Sundays, I was an altar boy and took it very seriously. So it seemed to make sense. And I came down the next morning and said to my parents, I'm going into the priesthood. Well, my mother cried and my father laughed and said, yeah, right. And I went on from there. So I began the process of becoming a postulant at the age of 16, a candidate about the age of 18, went off to college, went to seminary, ordained at the age of 24. So I followed a fairly similar pattern of many in those days. Today, people going into the ministry are usually much older with life experience. So I had this experience of just knowing and a calling, according to the gifts I had been given, to utilize them for the greater good. And it was easy. I loved public speaking. I loved people. I loved organization, creative thinking, program development, all of those things. And running a business, I also loved. I always was an entrepreneur. So the parish became for me a platform for extraordinary creativity from a staff that I collected who are some of the best in the United States today. They all hold very high positions in the US, and they were on my staff initially. So we had so much fun, and it was just a blast to be a people of faith who were all inviting to every kind of culture you could imagine in Menlo Park, Palo Alto, California, during the emergence of Silicon Valley. This was from 1974 to 90 or 88. And it was just David Packard was out there in the congregation, and Steve Jobs was down the street, and things were perking all over the place. It was a very exciting time to be involved. And then I went through, and hope you called this something about being a person of the seasons. My life had been so golden that it was time for something else, and my fall was coming. So my winter of discontent was when my wife and I decided to separate, and we were the perfect family with 2 little girls. And she is an adorable woman who I loved as the mother of our children, but we were going in separate ways. And that became a very, very lonely time for me. And I experienced people turning against me, taking sides, public scrutiny. And we were actually in Ohio at the time. I had accepted a new charge thinking this might help our marriage. And 3 months later, we separated, and she took the children, unbeknownst to me, back to California because I was living elsewhere. That first night when I realized they were all gone and I was back in our family home, I wailed at such a depth that I actually was outside my body listening to myself like I was a wounded animal. I never hurt so deeply, and my 2 little girls were gone, and I wouldn't know how long it would be before I would even see them. That was in the winter. And so my breakthrough began in the winter. The spring, on May 5th, the voice came to me at 5:30 in the morning when I was driving from my sister's home in Detroit, where I would go occasionally just to recoup. The voice said, Jeffrey, leave all that you have and all that you're doing and return to California. And it was so clear. That voice was so loud inside that car that I knew that's exactly what I had to do. So that was a second experience. I returned to California. I had no money. I had paid off all our bills and gave Nancy, my wife, everything she wanted, which was, it didn't matter to me. I had no car. I couldn't get back to California because I had nothing. I had $4,800 from the sale of the last few things of our household. And yet I knew that I was being called to do something else. Now, I could have said when I heard the voice, I could have asked, and do what? Because I knew I wasn't going to go back into parish ministry because that was too tenuous at the time. It was too painful. But good friends of mine gave me an old car of theirs that they didn't need anymore. And I headed west with my $4,800. And I had a vision of going into the workplace to be a parish priest among my corporate executives. They go there every day. They only came to see me occasionally. I figured I might as well go to where they are and start to create programs about being spiritual at work. And I called it several things: ministry in the marketplace, spirit at work. People said repeatedly, "Oh, it's a great idea, but you'll starve to death." And I took that really as a challenge. I enjoyed the challenge. So I went on for the next 32 years to build a global consulting training business called the Patnaude Group. Had as many as 15 trainers. I created all the seminars, trained them. They went out and did them when I was not available, and teams of them would go everywhere. And it became a marvelous, marvelous experience. I then followed what I thought was a vision that was appropriate, and I guess it was, to leave Palo Alto and to go east, where I'd grown up, to buy a property to create a conference center where my executives could come to where I was rather than me always traveling. And I was fortunate to go to a little town in Virginia called Warrenton. I had been there before. I found a family-owned farm that had been in the family for 100 years, and they were selling it very dilapidated. They had done nothing to it in 25 years. The vines were growing up over the main house. It was really a wreck. And I thought, perfect. This is just the kind of thing that I love, because I love transformation. So I began to build this center, put an awful lot of money into all the buildings. There were 6 homes and barns. I eventually reclaimed the land to a 90-acre lawn and created 13 gardens. We had 35 animals of horses, alpaca, sheep, goats, donkeys, dogs, the whole thing. And people started coming from around the world to spend 3 and 4 days in these seminars that were life-changing. And it was an 18-year run that was absolutely exquisite. Now, along the way, in the second year, though, I decided that Virginia was too hot. So I was going back to California, and I put the farm on the market. And no one wanted to buy a big place like that today. It's just too much work. And so I had an estate sale, and this woman came to the sale, which is a 4-day event, I guess, and 1,000 people came to this event. And I noticed her, of course, and said, "Well, it's good to meet you. I don't know where you've been, but I'm going back to California." And she said, "Well, that's fine, but I want that table and chairs." And I said, "No, it's going to this house I have rented in Tiburon, overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge and looks at Sausalito, and it's right there up on top of a ridge. And I have decks that look out. I need this table and chairs." And she said, "No, it's going to cost you more than it's worth." Well, she kept trying to get it from me. And I said, why don't you just come and look at it sometime and see where I placed it? And she said, maybe I will. And that's my wife, Susan. So she got the table and she got the relationship, which I am so blessed by. She is the love that I waited for all my life. So the time came for the next winter, and that winter was the loss of the farm due to so much being done virtually. And then COVID would have killed it anyway at the last couple of years, because no one was coming for seminars. And so I handed it over. And at the age of 69, I started again. And, it wasn't, I had no remorse. I was grateful about the incredible opportunity. I lost millions and millions of dollars that I had invested in this magnificent property. And we drove away and got rid of 90% of course, the belongings, because there was so much. And it makes you realize how much we have that just chokes us to death. And to move to now a little cottage really on the water, it's about, well, smaller than most of the cottages we had on the farm, to live a life of simplicity is just the greatest gift that I could have imagined. On top of that, I was invited to be a part-time priest at the local church, and I had never thought of doing this again. And yet I said, well, sure, I might be able to work that out and still do my corporate job. And as Steve Jobs said in his address to Stanford in 2005, I think it was, when he knew he had pancreatic cancer, he said, you can only figure out your life by looking back and connecting the dots. You can't look forward, you have to look back. And when I connect those dots and look at how my life was guided in some ways through terrible circumstances, some would say, but I saw them really as tremendous gifts, and I was not daunted at all starting over. And we have done that. And life at this moment could not be more lovely and such a surprise. And if you had told me this 10 years ago, I would have thought you were nuts. But to just believe that life has a purpose, we have a individual purpose, and to embrace it with gratitude, the blessings continue to flow. So there's been multiple seasons in my life. And another was when alcohol became too much of my life. And I decided, I knew that my final downfall would be someday in front of one of my clients, I would not be able to function appropriately. And it happened in front of Cisco. And I've been with Cisco for 32 years. I was with them almost in the beginning. I'm their longest standing, and I am still standing, consultant and mentor to their executives. And I was humiliated by the fact that I was not functioning the way I normally could. And I went back to my hotel room, got on my knees and asked that I be healed of this desire. I got up from my knees and never again, 15 years ago, have had even an inclination toward alcohol or its wily character. So those are three examples of, going to your knees, getting up, starting again. And it's been I wouldn't trade it for anything at all. And it's been faith. Faith, of course, according to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. I love an Indian poem that said, faith is the sound the songbird makes before the dawn. That's just as powerful to me. And every morning I get up usually at 4 or earlier. I sit outside and I listen before the sun comes up to the songbirds who begin their song. And I think of that. They know the light is coming. And if they know, then I can believe as well. So let me stop there for a moment there's my wife coming in. Of course, you can all have a look at the woman who wanted to take my table and chairs from me.
Hi, Susan.
And let me stop there for just some comments or questions. Certainly, there's so many more things I can talk about, would love to, but I'm not going to ramble on for an hour and a half, that's for sure. So I'll turn
Well,
it back to you.
that was a great summation. And thank you for taking us through the different seasons of your life, because I think that's always helpful to hear somebody else's stories and how they um, suffer, or how they shorten their suffering, or how they transform it into something more productive. And this uh, this faith has been with you from such a young age. I didn't know that story about being enveloped in the light as a child. Um, that's beautiful, and it doesn't surprise me. I know you and I have talked about the voices before, because I have, we've shared our voices, and so that's been a really nice connector for us. Tell me though, was there any time that your faith was shaken?
No, I really, well, yes. Okay, let me recoup. There was a time when I was the rector of Christ Church, Shaker Heights, and my wife had left with the children. And I'd only been there about 6 months. They had completed a 2-year search to call me to come there, so they were not happy after having looked for so long and whatever. And I had this marvelous office that had 2 doors and a little hallway in between, and a big conference room on the other side. And the people were on the other side waiting to crucify me. And I sat in my chair in my office, knowing they were already gathered. And I sat there and I felt, and I said, I feel so alone. And immediately there was this: you are not alone. I am with you always. And I stood up and walked through those doors to face the fire. So there have been times in which I have felt desolate, certainly, and I'm thankful for that. To be able to sit with people in compassion, which means to suffer with, that is the wounded healer. And without that wound, we don't have the depth. I learned this lesson when I was young. Called on someone in the hospital, an elderly person, and I said on my way out, I know exactly how you feel. And she said to me, you do not know how I feel. She was dying. I was walking out the door. And I thought, after all my years of my accumulated time on wards and hospitals, that was one of the dumbest things I ever said. But boy, did she teach me a lesson. I did not know how she felt. And we never do. But to get as close as we can to suffer with is the challenge. Mm-hmm. And I've sat with people. I was thinking of a couple I'll never forget. We're in the kitchen and their son is still hanging by the neck in the garage. And just 2 days ago, I was called in an emergency from other clergy to say that one of our clergy people wants to put a gun in his mouth and you're the only one that can talk to him, that kind of thing. And to drop everything and drive a couple of hours to go and sit with this person, there isn't anything much you can say other than to be, and to love, and to have faith, and to share having faith, especially to an ordained person, is really about the only thing you can do.
Well, that's actually very interesting, because I was going to ask, what do you do when somebody else is having a crisis of faith, and surely somebody, an ordained person who wants to put a gun in their mouth is in that crisis. And yes, presencing is just about all you can do, but is there, how do you rebuild, help somebody rebuild their faith?
Well, you let them know that you're there and you will be there tomorrow and the next day. That's sometimes the only thing they have to hold on to. And consistency is not the hobgoblin of little minds, as I forgot who said that. I love that quote. But consistency in that area is really important to continue the reach out, because at any moment they can fall into the abyss.
Right.
But how can you do that when you, in my parishes, I used to have a couple thousand at least members, if not more than that. And of course, I had also many clergy and staff, but sometimes they only want you. And how do you handle the burden of people who come to you who hurt? That's when I learned the breath prayer, and to learn how to fill up constantly while people were in their pain, to try to be present for them. Platitudes and counseling and telling people what to do, it's ridiculous. You don't do that. We know in the corporate world that 80% of self-directed goals are achieved. 20% of directed goals by a manager are achieved. So you can't tell people what they should do. You walk with them. There was a funny experience from The Voice when the farm process was in transition. I read it in my journal this morning because it happened to be on this day. Years ago, I said, Lord, show me the way to go. And the Lord said emphatically, I am. And he had an attitude, and I laughed out loud. And I thought, well, what perfect I am, of course, is the name of God. When Moses said, who shall I say has sent me? Tell him I am sent you. Well, I am spoke up. And I laughed and laughed, and I wrote it in my journal. It was hilarious. And I said, oh, of course.
Duh. That's funny. That's great. Well, I think that, the way you're sharing your story, it's almost as if faith hasn't been a choice. It's been intricately woven into your life, in such a powerful way that, momentary doubts, are easily, well, not easily, but quickly overcome just because the relationship is so strong. And yet, I think for many people, faith is a choice. That especially if they haven't been open to their spiritual development. Let's say, like everybody on this call is spiritually minded, otherwise they wouldn't be here. But even so, there are times when you're kind of like, oh, should I really, believe this much? And how much is okay to believe? Like, you and I are used to, we're in 100%, right? 110%, we're in, and we work with that other side, and let them inform us and guide our lives and so on. But there are lots of steps leading up to that. And one of the things that I like to explore with people and to sort of talk about is when you have your toes curled around that cliff, and you're kind of like, do I dare have faith that if I go over, I'll be caught? And I usually say, well, you can't be caught unless you go over. So there is this leap of faith. It's a really great term. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you remember Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he had to go step across the chasm, and he had to put his foot out, and suddenly the bridge started to materialize. That was a great theological premise right there. And there's a traditional saying in Judaism that the Red Sea never parted until Moses first put his foot in the water.
Mm-hmm.
So stepping out, it takes courage.
Yeah.
And trapeze. I always love these trapeze artists, and Susan Taylor just showed me one of the films of people she knows that are out there in the jungle doing trapeze. And Sam Keen, if you know Sam Keen's writing, great writer from Marin County. He and his daughter were out of communication for so long, and she was a trapezist. And he, at the age of 65, began to learn trapeze, and he did it with her. And the first time, he was the handler, I guess. He caught her in midair, and it was the time they started their communication again.
Oh,
You know, stories like that are just monumental in terms of what people are willing to do to take the risk. And you're the one that introduced me to Lisa Miller. Oh my gosh, if you don't know Lisa Miller and her work, you've got to know her. And the fact that our God spot in our brain, from the hippocampus and the amygdala and the where else, anywhere, is a God spot in which everyone has this potential for the spiritual life. Now, what gets in the way of that is religion. And if we look at ancient society, it's inscribed in all the Roman ruins and the Greek ruins: religion, war, victory, peace. And it's been around ever since. That religion causes war. What's necessary is victory in order to achieve peace. Well, Jesus comes along and completely upsets that ideology by saying, no, the peace that you seek is within you. The kingdom of God is within. It is not through warfare. It is through this process of internal transformation and individuation as a start. And Maslow went, he had a good formula, but he didn't go far enough. There should be an inverted triangle above Maslow that says, okay, now I'm ready to begin the spiritual life. A self-actualized person is not necessarily spiritual. They haven't made the jump across the chasm into the next triangle, inverted. So it does take courage. If you read the book Power versus Force, another marvelous book written by a medical doctor, scientist, who through kinesiology muscle tested all the emotions from shame to peace. And shame was the lowest level and most destructive energy in our systems. And peace is the highest form under power. So force energies are anger, addiction, shame, guilt, pride, etc. Whereas under power, it's rational thinking, neutrality, love, joy, and peace. So Jesus essentially is saying, claim your power. He knew exactly the right meaning of power. But what's in the middle, right in the middle of his formula, is courage. Right. And it takes courage to go from force into power. And it took courage to get up and to believe that I was putting something behind me multiple times to go ahead. But I don't think we're terribly courageous unless we feel we're guided and accompanied by something way beyond who we are. It's the realm of not knowing what we don't know. You don't know what you don't know. I love the last words of Steve Jobs. Wow. Oh, wow. Wow. And he died. And Steve was a snot. I mean, he lived on the same street. He was not a good person a lot of his life. Yeah. And for him to experience the majesty of the next side, yeah, it's a great story. Great story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Yeah, we explored one month this year. We explored strength, and we got into power versus force as we were going through that month. And as you say, it takes courage to go from one to the other. Let's talk about religion a little bit, since that is your such a big part of your background, and that you're still doing it. You're still in an Episcopal church, and you're preaching. how has your has your religious faith changed over time? Because you're very open-minded, obviously. I mean, I don't see you confined by a religion. I see you as a wide open person. Maybe you can help us explore that a little bit.
Yeah, in California, I was called the irreverent Jeffrey Patnaude when introduced. So I used to love to push the envelope. Matthew Fox was one of my teachers, and if you don't know Matthew Fox and all his writing, you would know what I'm talking about. Matt still today he's the Meister Eckhart of today, and it was teachers like Matt and others who just, and that's why California was so good for me. It really expanded me from an upstate New York consciousness into a far more vast way of thinking. Um, Religion means, it's from the word in Latin, mean to bind together. And the analogy, of course, is that it does just the opposite. For so many, there are 30,000 denominations in the United States alone. So when Jesus said, be one as my Father and I are one, it wasn't obviously talking about one great collection of people that all met under the same roof. We have different ways of worship. We're tribal people, and it should be that way. You know, the Black churches that we're working with, and I'll be preaching next week at a Black church, following a Black preacher we had at our church a month ago who just lifted the roof with his preaching. And, you know, we got a standing ovation for this man that just sweat and spit and yelled and praised. Oh my God. So I will not be doing that. That's not my style. But that's okay, because we as tribal people love symbology and we love ritual.
Yeah.
We all wash ourselves the same way in the shower. We start with the same arm or armpit and we go from there. Just look at the rituals that we have in our life, and you take them away and people get very irritated because we like our rituals. Well, when it's about spirituality, the Episcopal Church has always been that beautiful place in the middle. We are a church of questions, not of answers. It was Carl Jung who said we are crucified by opposites until a rising third takes shape. I've always hung out as a centrist and trying to understand both sides, even though politically these days it's very difficult for me to try to understand and have patience to understand, but I have to try, because a week ago I sat in a courtroom in Norfolk. One part of the congregation was on one side of this manslaughter trial of a child from our own parish, and some people from the parish were on the other side of the aisle who testified against them. And you have to minister to both of them. Wow. Which I do. Wow. There's no division, and we do, the clergy at our church. There's no siding about anything. It's an inclusive way of accepting people into a religion that is essentially a ligament to hold us together. And the community is a beautiful community, in terms of we don't talk politics, and we don't, that's about it, because that's just too volatile these days. But we are gay and straight and not black and white yet, but we have certainly our connections now with multiple Black churches. Susan Taylor and I are working very hard on that project to bring us together into a project called Halo. And Halo is downloading all the talents of all 52 churches in this area, so many of which are little tiny places hardly surviving. And we create a barter system in which we borrow an electrician from here and 2 soloists from here, and everybody's got a certain number of points, and we all work together. Well, it's being seen as a revolutionary idea, and we look at each other and say, duh, this is just so basic. Come on, people. And they're excited about it. Fantastic. Why not? It's about collaboration.
Let me ask you this. So let's just touch on Habits of Heroes. This is one of the most inspiring projects that Jeff has been running for a long time. And I'm wondering, because I know that there is faith involved in that program, but I'm wondering, is it non-denominational? Can you talk a little bit about Habits of Heroes and how you approach faith in that?
Oh, non-denominational, my God, that's never crept into my 32 years on the floor of corporations like Hewlett Packard and Cisco and GoPro and Apple. I mean, it just goes on and on. And I think as an Episcopal priest, I've been able to do that successfully because we are eclectic. And I'm as much Eastern and a Taoist as I am a Westerner Christian. I love all the traditions because there's a thread that goes through. It's the mystical thread of wisdom.
Yeah.
It's there. I created Habits of Heroes about 12 or 14 years ago because there was no mentoring program. I had taught transformational leadership programs for decades, and there was nothing about mentoring. And I looked on the internet, and all I could find are preparing people for summer camp and things like that. So I thought I'll create a mentoring program, and I'll look at the practices that I was taught by my mentors. And I came up with 12 that were the most powerful and simple. So sit quietly, show up, pay attention, give gratitude are the first 4. Love your family, tell the truth, do what needs to be done, and release attachment to outcome. And then finally, honor kindness, walk humbly, do justice, and learn eternally. So I learned those from teachers like Angela Sarian, Matthew Fox, the list goes on. And wrote the book, Habits of Heroes, then created a program that is a teach to learn process, which we do through our foundation Wingspan, in which I teach someone or a group the lesson, and they have to turn around in the next week or so and teach 2 to 3 others. And by teaching it, they learn it, of course. And then the next week, and it's a year-long program, once a month. Every one of those things I just mentioned are very spiritual practices, but I just call them habits. And they're not habits until you practice them. So as Aristotle said, that excellence is not an act, it's a habit. And so you have to practice a lot, as we know in athletics, to become a professional. So mentoring is so important, and we can't wait until we're 60 or 70 to become a mentor. So we have it in West Virginia high schools. There are 3 schools that have been teaching it for about 5 years. The 11th graders then turn around and teach the lesson to 9th graders. We've attempted it in the formerly incarcerated, and that's difficult to get their time because they're trying to make a living and make a life. But it's an available program for transformation. In fact, it's so interesting. Just 3 days ago, a Amazon bestseller wrote me on LinkedIn and said, "You don't know me. I've talked about you for years. My husband's life was changed years ago in the Habits of Heroes at Cisco. And I just want to thank you. His life changed, our life changed, his relationship with our children changed." So I had to meet this person, of course, and wrote her, and we connected immediately and have gone on to plan some things together in the near future. So every once in a while, you'll get these stories that come to you of people that you never knew who were touched by something you had done, and that's makes it all worthwhile.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And that's only one who actually reached out to you, but so many others have been touched. And I think you've worked in all different kinds of populations, not just with the high school kids, right?
Yes, I've worked with teachers and high school teachers in particular. I've worked, actually, the police chief of San Francisco has asked if we would train their 2,200 officers, but it needs funding because they don't have the funding for that. We see police officers and peacekeepers, and my son-in-law is a lieutenant in the fire department in Oakland, California. They all suffer from PTSD.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous issue that firefighters are facing as well as police officers.
Yeah.
There's so much to be done. So there's been a proposal to work with firefighters. It's really for anyone. It's just a life-changing program about simple practices that all build toward the ultimate, which is to learn eternally. And in doing so, we learn more about what needs to be done. I might add as well that Gary Malkin, of course, and I need to bring Gary. Gary has worked with me on this project for about 10 years. He's written all the music to the meditations and to the musical book because it's presented musically and a voice reads the chapter. And his music is just, of course, so magnificent that I am so blessed to have Gary as my buddy in this project.
He every week when we do our meditations, we use his music underneath. And so everybody here is very, very familiar with Gary. I've had him on, I've been presented him to everybody as well a couple of times. But yeah, there's something about it, isn't there? There's something about that resonance that he talks about is fully present in his music.
And what Gary and I have attempted to do, and we're not done yet because we want to redo it, make it shorter, that it's a multi-sensory learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at a film, because many of the practices have a film. You listen to his music, you listen to the voice. So you see and you hear, and we hopefully touch the three brains so that the cognitive brain is learning, the heart brain is being expanded, and the gut brain is being motivated toward change.
Beautiful, beautiful. Are you still teaching people? Are you still having gatherings, or is that on hold for the moment?
I actually am. I did a 4-day seminar just last 2 weeks ago in Richmond with a company. Next week, I'm in Herndon with Cisco for a 2-day. That's all starting to come back now that COVID, I wouldn't say is lessening because people here are dropping like flies with it, but fortunately it's not at the I guess the level that's making us die.
Right. Well, I'm just asking because, there may be people on the call who can maybe have an idea about it, maybe a need in their community or something they would like to be trained in. If they could sit in on somebody else's training, something like that. I don't know if that would be appropriate, but
Well, certainly I will always respond to any interest. Habits of Heroes is done all virtually, so it can always be done as a group from around the world, which has been people from Asia and Europe around at the same time. I don't know, that's difficult for them because they have to comply with my schedule, and I know that they're up in the middle of the night. I just developed a course called what did I call it? Mentoring Mastery, the practice of energy intelligence. So we know all about IQ, and because we all were confined to that way of learning as children. And then EQ came out in 1995, which has always been the center of my work. But this is really about VQ, vibrational quotient, and how the 7 chakras. And Suzanne was just in a course with me in which we went through the 7 chakras, and for a course called From Aging to Saging, from older to elder. And it was about putting the chakras in alignment. It really based a lot on Carolyn Mace's work and her magnificent book. And how when we are in alignment with our energy centers and what they mean sacramentally as well as physically and psychologically, we are what Jesus said when he said, be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. The word perfect in Aramaic means integrated, not without blemish. We in the Western world interpret it as being, oh, I'm just not perfect. Well, that no one should attempt to be perfect unless you're seeking integration, because it's a dysfunction if you're a perfectionist. We know that from the Enneagram. You're somebody we don't want to be around. So integration is the key. And the three brains must be in congruence if you're going to make a best decision. The head has to agree with the heart and the gut has to agree with the heart. And, the whole thing goes like that. And that's a book called M-Braining. M as in Mary, M-Braining, written by Grant Susilo in Australia. It's a fascinating research into the three brains. So it's all about integration. And you asked me about liturgy, or not liturgy, but religion. We inherit religion. It's tribal, it's different. We all have our little quirks about how we do it, and that's okay. But we have to focus on the spirituality of our faith so much more importantly than the tenets of canon law. And Jesus, he took 678 Mosaic laws and said, oh no, there are only two. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. That'll be enough. And of course they hung him for it, but that simplicity is next to godliness.
I agree 100%. And I'm just always so impressed with you. It's really, you're something else. Here's what I'd like to do is open up for anybody who has questions. Yes, Dan, go ahead.
Thank you so much for your really beautiful vibration. Let's start with that, and then the languaging and the messaging. So in today's world, chaotic as it is, what are we holding on to with our faith? What is our faith helping us to trust in?
Well, I know it's difficult to say we are not of this world because we're in it, and we're sitting at the traffic light, and we're paying a lot for groceries. So we are in it. But we are, the Christ of culture is really not of culture, it's really beyond. And Jesus was very clear when he pointed to the face of Caesar and said, give to Caesar that which is Caesar, and to God that which is God. So I've always had, as you've heard, a mystical kind of relationship with spirit. And I work it out in the forms of liturgical church. And I'm sure people shake their heads at times when they listen to me preach and say, he's from California, what do you expect? And that's fine. I've had people yell at me and get up and walk out. So I'm okay. It doesn't bother me. I have nothing to prove anymore. So how do we live in this world? I read books like The Hidden Life of Trees, and I go out and I hug my trees. I love my trees. My dogs have taught me more about compassion and acceptance and adoration and love than most humans. I love my wife. I love my children, my grandchildren, our grandchildren. And, that helps me in these times. And I certainly love our God. There's no question about that. And I accept God's love of me. And that's often what people don't do. It's always this pursuit of love God, love God, love God. Jesus said, love God. Yeah, okay. Jesus really could have said, and also accept the love that you have been given as a gift.
Yeah.
And there's so much self-criticism in the world, and I deal with it all the time in the corporate world, as well as anywhere, of people not being enough. It was Sark. I don't know if you know Sark. Sark is one of my buddies from the past. We both published through 10 Speed Press. She had a great saying, I do enough, I have enough, I am enough, period. And she lived it. She does live it, a simple life. So live the life that makes the difference. This is my book, From Great to the Greater Good, when great is not good enough. I gave that TED Talk right in the middle of our former president's reign. And I was so sick of hearing great, and because it was about triumphalism and about dominance. And my subtitle is, and this is the book that I haven't written, when great is not good enough, it means that we're not being good. Let's be good people first. Let's be kind again. Let's celebrate the practice of kindness and civility and manners, and stop saying no problem and say you're welcome. Things like we used to do. So that's how I live in the world. I look at what I mentioned, which is thousands of years old: religion, war, victory, peace. That's our DNA. I don't know if it will ever be different. That we are at war about something. And the only way to peace is through victory. Well, that's not true. So be at peace. Start with you. Make a difference. And my theory about morphic resonance with Rupert, and he doesn't buy it yet, so I have to convince him, is that if we contribute our little field of morphic energy to the greater pool, which he identifies as around the earth, which he says has more influence on our own DNA, it holds memory and story, etc. If he believes that, and I believe that, if we contribute to that, so it's so good, it will go in the back door of those who are not and change them. And that's the theory behind that book. I read From Great to the Greater, no, I read From Good to Great, Jim Collins's book years ago, like many did. And it's a good book for business people. But the moment I put it down, I took out the copyright From Great to the Greater Good, because I said he didn't go far enough. It was all for the purpose of being great, which meant profitable and really making a lot of money for people and having achievement, of course, and all that. But no one talked about the earth and the population of the earth and those who starve and those who are dying. And I'm proud of Cisco, and I may have had a little contribution, having trained maybe 15 to 18,000 of their people, that they are committed to ending world hunger by the year 2030. They gave 50 million 2 years ago to the city of San Jose, California, to end homelessness in San Jose. They are committed to the greater good. They have the largest training institute in the world called Cisco Academy, always 2 million plus students. And they hire high school kids who have gone through the academy as a starting pay of $60,000 to start with them. I mean, they really walk the talk. And having worked with John Chambers in particular during those years, who was a very gracious, giving man, Cisco is one of those companies that's making a contribution to the greater good. And I think a little bit that part of my legacy is helping shape a company a little bit toward what they're doing. So we have to start at home. Everyone said that. Clean your own house first, and your closets, and believe and accept the gift of faith. Accept the fact that you are loved beyond measure. It can't even be described how much you're loved. The hound of heaven is after you and does not give up and says, Jeffrey, I'm with you. Jeffrey, I am. Keep moving. And that's what God said to Moses. 40 years of wandering around the desert because he wouldn't stop and ask for directions. He gets to the place of the promised land, and he says, well, now what? And God just said, keep moving. So whenever I'm feeling like not moving, I think of that and I get up and keep moving.
Beautiful. So it's interesting. What I'm hearing you say, if I had to put it in a nutshell, is there's faith that we are loved. There's faith in the life around us, the love in our lives around us, with the natural world as well as the human and animal worlds, and faith that the thing that's loving us is dependable and ever present, omnipresent. And it really does boil down to all that. And I agree with you. We aren't in this day and age, especially when the bombardment is so unrelenting to kind of cut us from faith, I think, to bring us down to the lowest common denominator, to bring us into fear and treachery and, what's going to happen and all of that. It takes a strong arm, it takes a strong will to refocus oneself on those things that you just mentioned, and right, commit to commit, because we're not any good to anybody if we can't sort of rise up out of that stuff. And in order for our morphogenetic fields to influence anybody else, that's what we've got to do. We've got to kind of rebuild every day. So,
well, oppression and lack of justice, instead of anger, it could be always the fuel for change. And it's the fuel for faith. The church was, let me say, the followers of Jesus were most powerful when they were not sanctioned. So Constantine did a terrible thing for the church in the 3rd century by making it legal, because then the Roman Empire took over.
yeah.
Everything about the church became the Roman Empire. The vestments, the processions, the candles, the new emperor essentially was the bishop. And look what happened. Bishop palaces and incredible estates, and it's disgusting. What's happened to the church, and I mean the Catholic, the small c, and certainly Roman Catholics have a lot to deal with for sure. But we are most strong when we are down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you say we have faith in those who love us. That's a good thing until you're betrayed.
Yeah.
And then that's the deepest wound of the human psyche, is betrayal. So this is one love that does not betray us. And it also happens to be the source of all love.
Yeah.
So if we think of creation as being made out of love, and we happen to love our dog, where do we think we got that energy from, or that experience of how to do that? From the beginning, from the bang. And we did emerge from a beginning. Even the scientists say it, the theologians have always said it. We learned that an expansive universe must be, if you reverse the process, it could contract back into something.
Yep.
A bowling ball ready to explode into 5 trillion galaxies, we estimate at this point, 5 trillion. In the new telescope, the Webb telescope, wait till that begins to emerge and show us what Hubble couldn't, even though Hubble was a miracle.
Right. Well, let's see. Does anybody else have a question for Jeff? Linda.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. You have mentioned God quite often. Could you describe God?
I'm looking at her.
Well, and are there different meanings of God as there are people? But if you were asked to describe God, how would you respond?
Well, it certainly would not be anthropomorphically. There is no human white beard. And the average person, the average adult, if asked to describe God, will describe that. Just like that terrible picture of Jesus hanging in living rooms across the United States, blonde hair, blue eyes. Jesus was not blonde haired and he was not white skinned. So the Black Madonna at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco always has been a fascinating section where I would always go and look at her. Very controversial initially, but we do know what Jesus, that he was human. That's historically true. There's no question about the fact that a man from Nazareth named Jesus lived. We have so many writings attributed to him, many of which are authentic, many are not, and that's okay. We know that he was a great teacher. His parables are mostly authentic and have lived on for centuries, with meaning each time you read them. So that's why Jesus is such an important characteristic. Character with characteristics for me to mimic. And it was Confucius that said there are three ways to wisdom. Mimicking is the easiest, experience is the bitterest, and reflection is the noblest. So I like to reflect on what I know and what I've experienced. And I sometimes mimic my mentors who are more godlike than I. The word God is loaded. Just try in the next dinner parties of saying out loud God and see how many people run out of the room or look to the floor. It's one of those words that's really loaded. So energy, creation, creator, co-creator, whatever. I don't put God into any, and I use the term because it's dog backwards, and my dogs are certainly holy. I think of God as this indescribable source of a little bit of the creativity that flows through me, through some of the love that I'm capable of, which normally I would not be capable of. And I attribute that to the creator, male, female, in between, no designation whatsoever in terms of gender or age or color.
Well said.
What do you think about all the channelings that are going on now? So many channelers are channeling Jesus and Jeshua.
I know.
They're coming out of the closet.
Yeah. Well, Hope has channeled Yeshua for me in the past. And it was very, very touching for him to say some of the things that he said, which only he would know. You know, it's that typical kind of experience. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's a wake-up call. We are living in, of course, dangerous times, but they're always dangerous. And so when you live on the edge of danger, I think you're more alert. And consciousness is everything. Wake up, people. That's what Buddha was saying. Wake up. And so the more conscious we can become, perhaps the more we can activate our spiritual God spot in our brain, not carry on the wounds of past religious experiences, which have wounded so many, and move beyond it to the place of being spiritual beings in a human experience, as Teilhard de Chardin said.
Sometimes I do periodically go to mass, short masses. I love the readings and the short sermons. And sometimes I think, I can't believe he's saying that. Sometimes it's hard to digest what some people are saying in the Catholic Church.
Well, I look for a nugget. I always look for a nugget. Having taught tens of thousands public speaking skills, I'm very critical when it comes to preachers who go on and on about, exegetical study and tell you what the difference between Matthew and John. Tell me what the gospel means. I preach from the gospel, not about it. And so, but I always try to listen for one nugget, so I didn't waste my time entirely.
Yeah, Shanti.
This is great because I'm a teacher for the last 20 years at a small Reform Jewish temple in Studio City in California. And I've kind of grown up in this temple. I've been there before I got married, had children, now divorcing. And so my view on life has changed quite a bit in the last 20 years. And I've become, I love the traditions, but I've become less religious, I think. And, the word God has always been, like you said, at a dinner party, a little triggering because I'm not quite sure what that placeholder is. But now I know spiritually what it is for me. And I have so much more faith in the last even just 2 years of my life. And I'm really realizing what that means. So I think I've been struggling for the last few years on how to really walk the line of like teaching about Moses and God is what, but trying to take, like you say, those nuggets and being able to be that bridge and to take that and to pass those along to the parents and the children. And I don't have to just follow that rule, but it's just wonderful to hear you speak of just not being just in that one spot. I'm sorry, I have COVID now. It's hard to express what I'm saying, but I appreciate that you don't have to be pigeonholed into one thing and that you're still doing such wonderful work spanning everything. And yeah, I'd love to learn some more about it.
In your tradition that God was never spoken. It was Yahweh did not have vowels. It was just Yahweh. It was a whisper sound.
Yes.
And we don't and just say I am. Because when you can say I am, which is what confirmation is all about in the Christian church, it's the child standing up saying, I have arrived. It's the rite of passage. It's also the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah. It is that age that says, I've arrived. It's the third chakra. It's the gut. It's the courage. And you say, I am. And the moment you do, you identify with the one who created you, who is I am. And that's when the spiritual life really starts to begin, because we are now co-creators with the source.
I feel that so much more. And it's helped me become like a better person, but like a more connected educator with these children and these families, and like, okay, I can do this in this setting, even if, yeah, I am.
And Shanti, I write children's books. I've written, I think, 35 children's books.
I saw that. I can't wait to see them.
And the reason is that I'm teaching myself something while I'm doing it, because I'm still about 5 years old. And I love the medium and the artists who come up with the characters, their perception of the characters. And it's because we love children so much. Susan Taylor and I are working on a show that will be like a Mr. Rogers, that will be available hopefully starting in the fall, going out Saturday mornings for 30 minutes, that has parentables, which are called parables for parenting. And some of those are my children's books, and there are other people's books, as well as parables in which we teach children through music and through certainly some puppets, but through all. We've had a group working on this for about 6 months, all these creative people from around the country. And we want to provide millions of children with access to this online show every week, so they can learn what it means to be spiritual. And it's okay to learn parables, to learn lessons, to sing songs, to dance, to have the red phone from God Central calling and asking questions or giving answers, whatever. We have so many things going on. It's so much fun, and it will be terrific.
What's it called?
Kids.
Great.
It's a great project. And I was too focused on getting my book done. I couldn't spare the time, but hopefully I'll jump back in at some point.
That's right. Hope was in the beginning and she's coming back.
All right. Listen, anybody else have a question? Because I think it's time to wrap this puppy up. This has been absolutely fantastic. So rich, so deep. I knew it would be. And Jeff, what can I say? I love you. And I can't wait to play again together and whatever is next.
I'll send you a check for all your nice comments.
Well, thank you everybody for coming, and share it. It's powerful stuff, and I think, and so timely. And your questions were great. And I think this can be very helpful to a lot of people. So I'm going to say good night and thank you again,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Much
Thank you.
love. Love to all the rest of you. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.